Greetings! Are you a wargamer? Do you prefer to get into the midst of combat, commanding large armies? Do you daydream about rolling initiative and bored out of your mind when the other players are just method acting? Or as some people like to call it, role-playing. Do you mash the A button continuously in a video game to skip those annoying dialogues? Well then, you might love the Hobgoblin. Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drahon, and welcome back to Pathfinder Hero Frame, where we take a look at the ancestries within Pathfinder 2nd Edition and try to create characters using backgrounds and classes that best fit the lore of that ancestry. And we are once again taking a look at a goblinoid race, but this time, the Hobgoblin. And yes, I used roughly the same opening joke for the Dungeons & Dragons Hobgoblin video, talking about the Wargamer and how they would probably love to play as the generals of combat themselves. Much like in Dungeons & Dragons, the Hobgoblins are warmongers that command the goblin armies. However, instead of being subservient to Maglubiet, the sort of conqueror god of the goblinoids, we got a slightly different story with Pathfinder's Hobgoblins. They're roughly the same, except for this one major event. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, we actually have a cultural difference that was not translated into Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So I wanted to go ahead and bring this up because I think it is a missed opportunity. So, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, Hobgoblins, much like the Hobgoblins of 2nd Edition, notably do not have any hair. They can't grow hair naturally, and yet, hair is seen as a status symbol. Hair is important in Hobgoblin culture, especially among warriors. It emulates bar guests and hero gods the Hobgoblins honor. They can never grow their own hair, nor skin hair from animals in the hunt. Instead, they will take the hair from humans and elves that they kill, and weave them into their hats, helms, or just straight up glue it onto their own scalps. It is gruesome. Yes, it's rather gruesome, but it is a cultural detail that the Hobgoblins of 2nd Edition are lacking. And I think it brings out a little bit more flavor to them that we otherwise do not have. With this one detail beyond the origins of the Hobgoblins being changed, we actually get something completely different from the Hobgoblins of Dungeons & Dragons. But that's not to say that the goblins of Pathfinder are just carbon copies. There are differences. Number one is part of their origins. The ancient goddess of life, force, and transformation had a powerful staff known as the Cantorian Spring, and she hid it on Galarian, in the expectation that a mortal would find and use it. However, a devil by the name of Conzoriant killed the goddess and claimed the staff for himself. He then used the staff to transform goblins into the first Hobgoblins and instilled in them a hatred for elves. Conzoriant's goal was the creation of an army that would tear through elven defenses and raise their cities. Now, elves did discover this plan and end up destroying the Cantorian Spring, which freed, quote-unquote, the Hobgoblins from the control of their demon lord, or devil lord. But the hatred for elves still remained, which is just kind of cool. And this is actually instilled into one of the heritages known as the Elf-Bane Hobgoblin. They are resistant to all forms of magic that they call elf magic. It's every magic, but they just call it elf magic because they hate elves so much. They blame everything on the elves that they are programmed to hate. And it is just fascinating when the lore is able to work its way into a character like this. I've gone over this a couple of different times in Dungeons and Dragons videos talking about their little personality quirks. But having this in Pathfinder as well is just perfect. We didn't get this with the Hobgoblins in Dungeons and Dragons. They were just warmongers to be warmongers. They just served under their god. But Hobgoblins, despite the fact that they no longer were forced to work under the demon lord or archdevil that they were under, they still waged war against the elves. In fact, they were part of many wars. The conquest of Kaoling, the Goblin Blood Wars that we talked about in the Goblin video, the Iron Fang invasion, and they even went for conquering Absalom and teamed up with werewolves from Darkmoon Vale in the Night of Silverblood. So, some lycanthrope dedication would probably be very plausible for a hobgoblin. So, yeah, that's great. And depending on where your hobgoblin comes from, they're going to have different techniques and different training when it comes to the art of war. Now, let's go ahead and get started with the heritages of the Hobgoblin. We have, of course, the Elf-Bane Hobgoblin, Runt Boss Hobgoblin, which are noticeably shorter than the rest of the Hobgoblins, but they are able to command goblins a little bit easier than other Hobgoblins. Next is the Short Shanks Hobgoblin, which have oddly shaped torsos and arms, which make their legs look shorter in comparison. We have Smoke Worker Hobgoblin, the Steelskin Hobgoblin, which I forgot the L on somehow. We have War March Hobgoblin, and the Warren Bread Hobgoblin. For backgrounds, it is recommended to use the Criminal, Hermit, Laborer, Martial Disciple, Miner, Nomad, Scout, and Warrior. Going over all the backgrounds, here are the ones that I would recommend for your Hobgoblin character. Attention Addict, Bandit, Baker, Battle Mechanic, Battle Scrounger, Bully or Beta, Cannoneer, Combat Carpenter, Conscript, Crown of Chaos, Dauntless, Deckhand, Fated Rival, Fiend Breaking Pilgrim, Gladiator, Goblin Blood Orphan, Guard, Gunsmith, Hammered by Fate, Hell Knight Historian, Hired Killer, Local Brigand, Martial Musician, Outrider, Quartermaster, Portal Scholar, Raised by Belief, Relentless Dedication, Report Runner, Sailor, Squire, Thrill Seeker, Total Power, and Veteran. For classes, I would recommend the Commander and Champion alongside the ones that Paizo recommends: Alchemist, Fighter, Ranger, and Rogue. I'm sure if the Commander was released alongside the Hobgoblin, it would be one of the classes that Paizo would have recommended. I mean, just look at some of the artwork for the Hobgoblins. They dress in a similar manner as the artwork for the Commander. But the Champion is also a good one, and we will get into the subclasses now. Starting things off with the Alchemist. Of course, it is stereotypical for the research field to be bomber, just like with the Goblin. But I would also recommend the Toxicologist, especially if you wanted to go with a Geneva Conventions route of warmongering. It doesn't matter who the target is. You're going to make their death as painful as possible. If it's an elf, let's make it even worse for them. Moving on to the Animist. Now, according to the lore, like I mentioned with Elfsbane, they do not like magic. And if a Hobgoblin were to take up magic, they would become exiled. However, I am reminisced to actually be able to list a couple of spellcasters, because some spellcasters are powerful enough to pretty much override their tribe's wishes of exiling them, as I'm sure you're quite aware. So, we're going to go ahead and get our first spellcasting class of the Animist. Like I said, they're not going to want to spellcast, so these spellcasting classes are going to be the rarest of the rare, even rarer than the Alchemist. So, with that being said, for apparitions, Crafter in the Vault and Witness to Ancient Battles will be the ones that best fit a Hobgoblin Animist. Moving on to the Barbarian. For instincts, I recommend the Animal, more specifically the Wolf, the Blood Rager, the Fury, and the Superstition. Moving on to the Bard. Just about every single army has to have its musician to help with inspiring the troops. So for muses, I recommend Warrior. Champion. Desecration, grandeur, and obedience are going to be the most common causes for a hobgoblin character, and probably the only causes any champion hobgoblin would ever think about taking. Moving on to the gunslinger, I would recommend the ways of the drifter and the vanguard, though you're probably going to see more vanguard gunslingers when it comes to hobgoblins, just because they are wanting to tear down the walls of any settlement they are trying to raid. Moving on to the investigator. Probably not going to be common, but it's going to be more common than any of the spellcasting classes. For your methodologies, I would recommend empiricism and interrogation. Again, with your interrogation methods, you're probably going to use crueler tactics, like, say, I don't know, waterboarding. You know, some of those interrogation methods that are very much frowned upon in today's society. Moving on to the rogue. For your rackets, I would recommend the mastermind, ruffian, and scoundrel. For your sorcerer, the bloodline of the diabolic is probably going to be your most common, but I also like the idea of the seer, since they also deal with battles. Moving on to the swashbuckler, I recommend the styles of the braggart, the rascal, and the wit. Next is the witch. The only patron thing that makes the most sense here is going to be the resentment, to kind of get thematic with this devil lord that created the hobgoblins. There's got to be a reason that this devil instilled this hatred for elves into the hobgoblins, and the resentment is probably going to be your best bet. And finally, the wizard. Of course, the only arcane school that made sense here is going to be battle magic. And that is all for today's video. What did you think? Let me know what type of hobgoblin you would play as in the comment section down below. And until next time, this has been Drayhan, and I am offline.